So hopefully that'll go well. I might have to take a little break in between. My voice isn't what it could be. It's not like my rock and roll voice friends that can last many, many hours singing. So over the years, my voice has deteriorated a little bit, but hopefully I can stiff you. If my voice isn't coming through or maybe the audio is too loud, let me know. But we'll try and fix it in the mix, as they say. So anyway, welcome. This is M1 Doc Thormax, and these are bite-sized pieces and easy-to-swallow capsules of an emerging new world. So go ahead and do a screen share, and do interject if you think you might have some important questions that will be recorded and need to be there for future content as well. So hopefully everybody can see my screen, and we'll start. So this presentation is called the HyperJump, an exoplanetary analysis. So you'll see this symbol in a lot of places in my presentations. It's actually from an extraterrestrial group called the UMO. If you don't have something to write now, there'll probably be a lot of notes that are worth taking, as we haven't gone over these concepts in a while. And Google and some even social media have implemented some of these concepts now. So it's kind of nice that we've had some support. But anyway, this symbol comes in different variations. And it was the group that originally contacted, the group that I contacted back in the 90s, that were working with these exoplanetary groups, mostly dedicated in science and medicine. We have updated a little bit of the info, since it seems that I'm still the only person in the English-speaking America that's brought these concepts through. But we're hoping that will change soon, and hopefully there'll be some other physicians coming in from Latin America, and will help bring the science and health to a different level. So if some of you have seen some of the presentations in the past, we really focus on planetary changes and our planetary, they say that anatomy, the subtle anatomy of the planet and the subtle anatomy of human beings, and show sort of the similarities between certain celestial bodies and human beings, and then even further yet into subatomic particles like the parton, the quanta, etc. In this case, this presentation is partly sponsored by one of the galactic councils. They name themselves the Multi-Galactic Council. We're brought forward, and I've been privy and honored to be part of their project. And so we'll be focusing a little bit more on the galaxy and its structures. So the galaxy in and of itself, since I don't have a whiteboard and I haven't fixed that up here. I know there's a way to do it, but in navigating back and forth, we'll get that down later. Either that or we'll fix it in the mix. So in speaking with the galaxy, in as every other third dimensional body, that's only at least half of the picture. Our galaxy has an electric body, it has a magnetic body, and it's really conformed across the gravitational field of its body. In other words, it has a unified field with the three rings, the same as every other structure. The important part is the electric body of the galaxy, because it sort of bifurcates and segments the galaxy into different sections. I don't know if they do it for organizational purposes, but it would seem as though it's a toroid, and it has these sort of orange, if it was an orange, these slices that come out of it, and they seem to use that for organizational purposes, for location, bilocation purposes. But at any rate, the galactic electric field is the one that's at play as far as the galactic changes that are happening or have happened since about 2009 to 2011, which we term the HyperJump. These are subjects that you probably won't hear even on the YouTube, the alternative science channels, because they're, well, completely extraterrestrial. They're alien to most concepts, even spiritual and mystery schools concepts. So I'll ask you to just be patient and place your mind in neutral as we sort of skim over some of these topics, because there's much more profound topics that have to do with what we're going over, and I'll try to do that in later presentations. So we know the galaxy is a spiral looking thing, is with many galaxies. They're not all spiral, as the Andromedan and the Milky Way, but ours in particular, if you remember, our star at one point was at the periphery. In other words, the outside of the galaxy. At least what I can remember. I don't know you guys who've been around for a little while, but our star was generally, at least the way that it was explained, was found at the outer rim of the galaxy. If you Google space now, it doesn't seem to be at the same location for whatever reason. And what happened was something very interesting, which I can't go over in super detail. I'm just going to go over it verbally in what happens. So if we look at the galaxy and its electrical structure, or its counterpart to the physical structure, we can see what we know so far is a 26,000 year timeline when any of the structure, whether it's a star or any other type of stellar body, travels or navigates throughout any galaxy, it usually comes from the center outwards. And as it passes the 26,000 year cycle, it sort of ascends. Because what you're seeing is the galaxy, as opposed to the human being, as we see it as a hologram, as a sideways accordion. In other words, each one of the planes or hologram of the physical body, in terms of the galaxy, it spirals upward. In other words, after 26,000 years, a star such as ours can reach the same point, but at a higher level. In other words, it corkscrews up. And if you could visualize that, it gives sort of an inkling as far as time, but not so much space, because it does change its location in space as it traverses the periphery of the rim of the galaxy. But something interesting happens as it steps up. Now, it's constantly stepping up in a spiral. But as it steps up through each one of those stages, it also needs to move forward. And by forward, I mean towards the center of the galaxy. So I used this in the last presentation, which is, I still haven't come up with a better analogy, but think of the new sinks that have that drain in the center, and they're not so inclined. It has a very, very slight incline inwards that allows for water to go from the outside to the inside. It's very similar to that, in that the center of a galaxy, our galaxy and most galaxies, there is a black hole. That black hole is what concentrates the gravitational field, that field that is in the equatorial region of the galaxy. So as it would seem that our star is about at the halfway point of its evolution. It hasn't evolved completely, but has evolved sufficiently to harbor life. Now, you've heard in other presentations that there exists a concept of sterile galaxies and non-sterile galaxies. And non-sterile galaxies are those that have a coefficient of -9 + 6, which allows for a -3, a -3. In other words, the moles or holding spaces in this type of a galaxy, the Andromedan and other galaxies, allow for the destabilization of structures, and so it holds a negative. In other words, it attracts particles to it. Particles such as nebulae bacteria. They're literally, the Space Brothers and the Command view particles out in space as bacteria. They're unstable partons, unstable quanta, and they're attracted to negative space, negative holding patterns. And that's what our galaxy, the Andromeda, and others, that's why they're called non-sterile galaxies. The sterile galaxies are formed first. Those are formed sort of as a sandbox. And that sandbox is utilized for avatars, biological engineers, co-creators, the Elohim, and those very large body beings that are learning how to create stellar structures. But they don't harbor life. It's sort of a laboratory of a galaxy. And there's more sterile galaxies, more sterile cosmos is out there than there are non-sterile galaxies. So the uniqueness is the non-sterile action of our galaxy. And that's, in other words, it's live, it's breathing, it's moving constantly. So something happened somewhere between, we were all expecting. I was here in Colorado, and I think it was G.W. Harden and friends hosted this event at the 2011 mark, right about that time. And we were all expecting something to happen in 2011 and 2012. But as you might imagine, today at 2020, that things didn't happen exactly as planned, or at least they didn't observe to happen as planned. Nothing really big that we felt happened exactly at the 11:11 point or even the 12:12. What happened at 12:12 was it had really happened about at the end of 2013 all the way through to 2015. It was an interesting event in that there was a jump of sorts of all stellar bodies to go forward. Now, another analogy that I could give you is that if you would view the galaxy as a round table, but with that hollow hole in the center, and then we had a tablecloth. And that tablecloth not only covered the top of it, but it covers the bottom. This is a very, very rudimentary example. But what happens is that tablecloth moves the structures, or the fabric moves towards the center of the galaxy. And what's at the bottom portion moves outwards. So what happens at specific timelines, specific events, when there's harmonization, or what did they used to call that? Something like a synchronization of most of the stellar structures. There happens something which is akin to a spark. And what happens there is it impulses the jumping of light from one stage to another. And something happened in that our star moved into a location about at the center of the periphery of the galaxy and the center. So it's about halfway through. And you can corroborate it with, so far I've just seen Google Space, but I know there's more evidence out there that we're actually in a different location. The reason it seems not to a lot of people, because everything follows. All of the celestial bodies, the stars surrounding, they all move together and in unison. So that is most of what happens at the circling of the 26,000 years is a series of jumps. Now, we've only detected one major one, but another interesting thing that happens during the jump is that there is a very marked polar shift, which hasn't happened completely yet. We're hoping that happens eventually, and we're hoping it happens gradually. But from what happened in the span of 2-3 years is pretty quick. And additionally, what happens, if you're all familiar with the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? That was one of the first mass introductions to quantum theory, in that there was different possibilities at any one time, depending on the observer. And so what happens is at any given time, at the moment of about, I think when this information come out, about 99 to 2002, we were given a series of courses and presentations from the Galactic Command on what life was like on angelic worlds and avatar worlds. And in there, they outlined what happens with parallel worlds, parallel bodies, and the timelines. And what happens with timelines is very interesting, because at the moment of a jump, at the very moment of one jump, is almost like everything defaults to zero. It resets the timelines back to where all structures, if we were to say, let's say planet Earth or even our sun, has at least 11 different dimensions or 11 different sections, which could be viewed as an open accordion. We're obviously in the third dimension, the third position. And as it jumps, that timeline has the possibility of moving across another timeline. And so that our third dimensional world and our fourth, which I'll get to a little later, the parallel world, they could, and its other bodies, in other words, the first and second dimension, or first and second band of frequency of the planet, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, they are all different types of bodies with different structures, can follow a different timeline than ours. And this would give the illusion that we're living two different times at the same time. Not true, but what happens is, sort of take, if you were on roller skates or in a roller rink and you had your skates inside of a track, one of your legs would be going in one direction, the other leg would be going in another direction. It starts out as with your both feet in the same place or right next to each other. And as time passes, those two worlds, or what appears to be two worlds, which was one world, start to separate. And so things appear to be less and less alike as they start to separate, which gives us the concept of a parallel planet. In other words, our fourth dimension, which absolutely exists. Questions up to there? Any comments? You guys have heard this stuff before. So the galaxy is very interesting, and that our galaxy is very similar to a feminine structure. The sun is very similar to a male structure. The planets are similar to a female structure, and so on. In that electricity jumps from one level or one logos to another. And so at the universe level, the universes are largely masculine in nature, and that means that they flow in a cubical structure, whereas our galaxy is more of a spherical structure. Even though it harbors many types of stellar bodies, which are male and project outwards, the galaxy is largely female, which gives that everybody who talks about planetary Gaia, in a similar sense, at a higher level, is our galaxy, which is of a feminine nature. So there's lots of things that have been going on prior to the HyperJump and post to the HyperJump. And so I'm going to be sort of navigating between what we call the cytosbaric quantinomium. In other words, the Godhead, the center of all that is, where all cosmoses are created, all the way to the level of the human being and those similarities. But there are certain events that are going to happen very soon. Have you all heard of 2024 and that event? because that's the next big one. Now that is the prophecy of the Aztec calendar. Now I've seen this. I just recently acquired Gaia TV just to catch up on what's out there. I've never had it and I'd never seen it up to about a week ago. But I was surprised to see so many references to the Mayan calendar and the Aztec calendar, and people of quite a bit of fame have made mistakes in referring to the Aztec calendar as the Mayan calendar and vice versa. Very different civilizations and cultures. The Aztec calendar is the big one. It's the big one with the sort of the head and the face in the center with different timelines. That's the one that's going to be more like or closest to what's really going to happen. According to the council, we're going to have 2 more HyperJumps, one in about 2022, and then the other one, which is going to be a major jump in 2024, December 21st. Same thing. The winter solstice will bring on a major jump, and that will leave those structures that are moving across the fabric of time and space in the same position for a great many eons so that they can evolve. And they have to, these bodies need to move in space because the energy is different. It's different at every level of the electric body of the universe. So if you can imagine that those bodies or stellar bodies on the periphery are the youngest, and those that are at the center are the most mature stellar bodies, you can see why we need to be moving forward towards the center of that galaxy and eventually bring union between, for instance, the Andromeda, which is the closest one to us, the closest one that harbors life, and bring in I hate that word, but it's bring in a new age, but it's really a new epoch of dimensions, of interdimensions. And it's going to become a little clear as even as short as 2 or 3 years that are coming, of what changes that are coming forth. We're already seeing them, and things are unfolding quickly. But we're going to see even more and more of those. And many of those are happening at a soul level. So most of the stellar councils view the center of all that is and give it sort of an English Erdem name. And Erdem is the original language of our galaxy. They call it a cytosbaric quantinomium, or the name of the major quantum. It's the cell. It's the cosmic cell. The name is really not important, but the concept is. So you'll find that every periphery, at every threshold of life, beginning from the partionic levels, from the parton, which is the real atom, and the actual center of all that is, the cytobaric quantinomium, have this structure. If you've seen these presentations before, this is a very, very old, and I think it's even, it's made on a drafting table. But it explains how 36 structures, 12 structures at 3 different spheres circulate around a nucleus. And they do different things that are really interesting. This is the actual light bulb behind the chakra. I won't get too much into it because we're not going to get into neutrinos and all that. So in order to understand some of the changes, it's important that just like if we want to know about where we're going, we need to learn about history. It's important that we realize that there is the center of all that is, whether it's conscious or unconscious, or whether it's scientific, whether it's chemical or gaseous. It's important to know that there does exist a cosmic cell. In other words, a nucleus to all that is. And through something called partionic translation, in other words, the compression of particles from one of those conical structures, commonly called cones of light, are able to be translated or transformed into a different holding pattern of particles, which allow for the transference of matter from one dimension to another. That's commonly called partionic translation. So we've already seen a little bit of the time. Has anybody noticed that time is getting shorter? We still see it on the clock as the 60 minutes, but it just seems like there's not enough time, and there's a reason for it. So in our dimension, we know that 1 hour is 60 minutes. So here's the sequence of our time in one dimension. It's different in our parallel world. We have a fourth dimensional world, which is almost like our neighbor. It's the other Earth, which is right next to us. And it moves along with this planet. But this dimension is 60 minutes equals 1 minute. 60 seconds makes up 1 minute. 1 second, there's 12 instances in 1 second. And for one instance, there's 60 quarks. For one quark, there's 60 spins, and one spin equals 12 quanta. Again, we won't go into the details of how each one of those quantas are made, but that's the configuration. Now, the fourth dimensional world their hour is 90 minutes. In other words, the sun is up for 90 minutes, leaving a longer day. The electrics on the fourth dimensional world are such that they can only harbor direct current, whereas our world will only harbor alternate current, which is conducive for binary electricities. Binary electricity, binary thought forms. And the fourth dimension, our neighbor world, is more conducive for mental development, which makes it about 100 years ahead of our science and technology. So there are 6 levels of integration through change. There's something called cosmic acceleration, which we just sort of went through, just skimming through the idea. You can go much deeper with some good graphics. Partionic translation is a transformation of the preceding particles into these conical compressor, transducer-like particles. Basically, you've heard Nassim Haramein talk about the graviton is work with black holes. Partionic translation happens through one dimension, through a black hole, and that next dimension. It's the segue or the gateway between one dimension and another. We have on planet Earth many examples of that. Multidimensional integration, that means what we were talking about is if our body or our planet is harboring life, the third dimension and the fourth, that the fifth, sixth, and seventh dimensions will start to play a role directly in the evolution of the structures where we're at. So another way of explaining multidimensional integration is by viewing either the human being or planets as a hologram, as 1 through 11 dimensions, and that those dimensions are only holding spaces or parameters of frequency. Ours, the physical particles which we can feel, see, are at the third and the fourth. So with every hyperjump, we're moving towards that third and fourth position to a fifth and sixth position, and so on. The hologram is not moving. The hologram's there already, it's fixed. But that the particles, our world will take a jump from that seat into the next seat of space. And that's what it means by multidimensional integration. So the planetary shifts are, 1, the shifting and the more interaction. We'll see more, we already have since the 1920s and 1930s, whereas we've seen more UFO and paranormal activity. That is the activity of the sister world and our world coming together. Many of those apparitions, manifestations come not from necessarily a higher dimension, but from our sister world. A lot of the ships that come through dimensions are part of the fourth dimensional world, and vice versa. our particles are seen in their world. And finally, human transformation, which we're going to get through in a bit. And finally, the genetic integration, which has to do with the virtual aspects of DNA. We've heard the term spiritual DNA, but we don't really know what it's like. So remember that from the parton all the way to the center of the cosmos, everything that we know of in science, medicine, and even in physics has its antiparticle. It has something behind it, behind the veil. And what's behind the veil is still not known to most science and physics. So genetic integration with the higher dimension is really important, but we need to know the anatomy behind it. And we'll get to that because it has changed a little bit. With that comes the development of a higher world, a different integration of human forms, which we are already seeing now. Now, I want to note real quick on this note is that I believe, Rick, are we still going to be doing the Paranormal Research Forum this month, or are we going to?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so something very important with some of my patients. I'm sort of semi-retired. I only take certain patients that are more serious and need more attention. But it's come to our attention and the council's attention that we need to come up with a radionic frequency, or what's called balance rates, for the coronavirus. And this week I'll be developing that together with a few other people around the planet. And we're going to be bringing those frequencies to that group. So hopefully that meeting with the Paranormal Research Forum, we should have that frequency, and we'll be giving out samples of it, and also what it actually looks like, the actual numbers. This is important because this has to do with another saga, because I'm talking to you about the ideal position, the ideal situation in the changes. But you need to know that there are wars out there, that there is controversy, there are alterations, even at the galactic level. And so that this virus has a very interesting story behind it, which is beyond this presentation. We'll be going over it then. So the renovation of worlds is important, as well as the renovation of life. You've heard that, what is it, that the strongest prevail. There's a saying behind it, right? That the strongest of species are the ones that prevail. It's also those that have the ability to be able to translate DNA codification and altered codification. So this is one of the new factors that we're seeing. It's coming in from the Dark Brothers. They're bringing in a whole series of artificial programming. Some is for the betterment of humanity, the betterment and acceleration of the worlds, and some of it is not. And it's important that that be distinguished. The coronavirus is an example of one of those effects. And so it's going to be interesting to go over that detail, what's happening with that. So the transformation is mainly at the biological level of planets and anthropomorphic forms such as ours, not so much at the stellar and galactic level. There is, but not at the 26,000 year cycle. That happens at a much grander level. But most of the transformation that we'll see is the ability, for instance, to be able to live on light. And that skin, for instance, collagen, hyaluronic acid is changing at the very minute levels. Questions up to there? Comments? Frustrations?
Nope, moving well.
Okay. So this next subject has to do with the Kumanu. is what they call it. The Stellar Brothers call this version, it's about the 7.0, 10.0 version of the human being. It's been updated and upgraded various times. And it's gone all the way back to zero at least a couple of times throughout the evolution of this tiny planet. Since Hyperborean times, there's been two major cataclysms that have wiped out life as we know it. The latest version has more godlike, supernatural abilities than most other times. Whereas in the other two ages that the Kumanu was around, it did not have as many godlike features and implements as the one now. We're going to start seeing more and more. Hopefully, I'm going to try to keep up with what's happening because the developments are coming along quite quickly, which is really good. But not always the galactic perspective is in there. So the Kumanu is basically this biocybernetic complex that makes up the human anthropomorphic form that we know of as the bodies that we harbor now. So this is one of Rick's favorites. We've tried to get this down in many times in order to explain what those spaces are, right? More on a planetary and cosmic level. But it's easier to understand it at the planetary and cosmic level if we come down to the level of the human, because in essence they're pretty much the same with a few changes. So in the first band of frequency is where at that parameter of frequencies where molds, MOULD, or structures are at. There are no programs and there are no physical. Something that you could see under a microscope doesn't exist there. These are all virtual holding spaces. And that's why they call it gestational. This is where systems are created or developed during the embryonic fetal stages. And it is white for all intents and purposes. Just know that it's of a white vibration. The functional aspect is a second band of frequency, and it has to do with programs, specific programs. That's what gives the molds or the particles that are in a specific holding pattern the ability to execute themselves or move throughout time and space. So it's the functional or yang aspect, where the yin aspect is the first, the yang aspect is the second. The third band of frequency is the operative. In other words, it's where molds and programs or the software and hardware comes together, and we can actually see life emerging. The fourth band of frequency is largely intellectual, but has to do with RNA structure. It is also where the magnetic field sits, resides, and is the place where, if you're able to project yourself into that space, you would see a series of cones, rods, spheres that make up something called the great current of energy, which is the light bulb or the facility that creates the etheric field or the magnetic field. And the fifth band of frequency is emotional. That's where you'll find your chakras. All the electricities that have to do with the emotion are found at that level. And there are many. It's not just the chakra itself. It's that first structure that I showed you that looks sort of like a light bulb with things surrounding it. It has cabling features called biofeedback circuits. It has a whole series of for all intents and purposes, cabling from point A to point B that determines the electric field of the body. At the sixth, you'll find something else, which is the mental body, but it's not a foo-foo area. There are actually 6 mental spheres for every anthropomorphic form. These are part of the eternals, or you don't get a brand new set as you do the chakras. Though the mental spheres are found at this area. It is blue. Going on up, that the 7th and the last space has to do with, as we're going from the 1st to the 7th, the particles of the energy is getting smaller and higher. So as we're at the 7th space, that has to do with the 7th chakra, it's the volitional. It has to do with will. And there you'll find the virtual aspect of DNA. Again, it's almost like in a spiral, you go back to the gestational, because here are the molds, M-O-U-L-D, but having to do at a DNA level. And the other 3 have to do with, the 8th, 9th, and 10th chakra. Those are spheres and bands of frequency that are happening outside of the body and or inside, that are compressed within the soul structure, so that the consciousness is in a rose field, but it has to do with the connections of the 7th chakra. Those 2 go together. So our planet has a very similar configuration. And if you've heard of quantum physics, you've heard of string theory, and now M theory. And M theory has to do with 11 major dimensions. So it's 10 bands of frequency, or 10 spaces, or 10 realms. And the 11th being that sphere that encompasses it all. It keeps it unified, and it separates it from the next human being or the next planet, etc. So that's called M theory. If you want more information on that, you can research M theory. I think the series Elegant Universe goes over it in great detail, if you'll get a chance to see that. Questions up to there?
Nope, I'm good.
Good. So the multidimensionality, well, the world of yogis and meditation and projection and spirituality handles this real well. The difference here is that the actual real world, the third dimension, is going to have a direct impact on the multidimensionality of human beings and planets, and is already happening already. The series of YouTube videos of beings and lights coming in through a camera and then leaving, that is sort of a manifestation of the multidimensionality, and that the worlds are almost colliding with each other. But what's actually happening is a transition of one particle to another, is what's saying, and it gives the effect of multidimensionality. In other words, the fifth and seventh dimension, the world of avatars, which is at the fifth on through to the seventh, that activity can be seen more often since 2011 to now, where before it was mostly, it was a belief. It was more held in the realm of belief, whereas now we're starting to see manifested proof of activity. All those videos and pictures of angels actually coming down and moving through space. Those are some examples of the multidimensionality of life sort of interacting with ours, in that we're not so isolated as we were before.
Is this an example of, as we certainly reach the period of the 26,000 year adjustment, that the dimensions and realms are bleeding over a little bit into each other so they are recognizable?
Well, that's somewhat what happens is we do, especially in the topic of the hyperjump. When you're doing a hyperjump, not all of the particles jump at the same time. It's almost like a fade, right? Where the particles of high acceleration move first, those of a denser acceleration move last. And so let's give the example of our dimension as our third and fourth dimension, our third and fourth dimensional worlds move in unison up to the next stage, to the fifth and the sixth. As it moves across, sometimes the laggers, the particles are left in the fifth and the sixth, are sitting there still. They haven't moved over and transitioned to the seventh and the eighth yet. And so it gives the illusion that we're living. Eventually, they all stabilize.
In part, is it like an organic evolution?
Yeah, exactly. So it happens as a fade pattern. Even though we see it as a big hyperjump, we're starting to, and that'll go away as well. As soon as the particles from the third and the fourth seat into the fifth and the sixth, we'll see less and less of what we thought in the interim of the transition. I don't know if that's clear or not, but it's sort of like, it's almost like jet lag. We have part of the energy from where you came from, and it sits and it hangs over. And so that's it's not that it has to be that way. It's just almost an operation of physics that give that illusion of, we call it an empalme or superimposition of one dimension, but it is temporary. To where eventually, and they say that the settling of the particles in their respective dimensions and bands of frequency take anywhere from 15 to 50 years to happen. So we can see that, and it's an exciting time because we're receiving a lot of information directly from those higher dimensions, even though it's temporary. So this is just a little bit of an explanation. Our third dimension is there where you see 5 and 6. I go over this a little bit more when we talk about what is a ray and a line and the particles, but that our third dimensional world has a valence of 6. Those are pyramids without bases. They're hollow, and they attract particles to it. In our dimension in particular, we have a valence of 6. In other words, 6 sides, a hexagon. Very important. Everything within our biochemical world, physical world, Even the drawings are of a hexagonal form. The magical world, for instance, has a valence of 5. It lacks the material substance. And that's where you see the mystery schools, the Masonic orders, the ancient Celtic and Druidic practices utilize the form factor of 5. So those are unique. And so the preceding dimensions, there is the world of the moles, which you see there in 3 and 4. And the higher dimensions are the 5th dimensions, which use a valence of 7 and 8. Sorry about the Spanish. Even over the years, I still don't have an updated English version. So these are some virtual structures that you may find, which eventually, hopefully, we only have maybe at the handful of focuses that we're really trying to focus this time around on certain works. One is the mind virus. All of you have heard from me and from the council, and that purpose, that works. And the other one is the Alpha Prima. And one of the abilities that the Alpha Prima, the master computer, has is to peer into specific bands of frequency. So if we were to peer into that 4th band of frequency, the one that comes right after us, that you could still feel when breathing strongly, when doing yogic and Tai Chi practices, that's the structure we're peering into. So this is called the great current of energy. It looks something like this. So if we were to take out, minus that physical body, the biological entity, we would be left with these specific structures. There's only a handful of them. We would see accumulators of the A-type. They're in both frontal lobes in the center of the head. And they're in charge of attracting alpha, beta, and theta particles, the subtle particles of air, the subtle particles of water, and the subtle particles of food that we eat, and accumulate those, and then release those to another structure called the zone of emission. The zone of emission is another matrix, a double matrix of what you really can't see here so well because there's too many, we're talking about too many structures, but it's called the peripheral network. So if we could see the biological portion of our skin, the counterpart is a matrix of energy that surrounds the skin area. That's the electrical portion. You double that in 2 zones of the body. One at the scalp, which is called the zone of emission, and one at the feet, the zones of retransmission. And they have a particular purpose. They attract and repel particles. So once the accumulators are full, they release the structures up into the zone of emission, and then when those are accumulated, they release them down to 10 major dynamic bases, or what we would see as the 10 major joints of the body. Now, what happens at every single joint is a major transductor. Again, there's that form, that honeycomb, hollow pyramid, and that spins at very, very high velocities. And it allows for the particles from one end of the spectrum to be compressed and repolarized and thrown out the other side of the dimension. So that allows for a polarizing and a cleansing, sort of a filter between those particles to descend down into, in a polarity fashion, into the bottom of what would be our feet, but it is called the zones of retransmission. That then is placed into, in combination with the golden energy, the orgone energy of the planet, that comes up through the center of the planet and out the periphery of the planet. It goes up through a central tube all the way up and out the head, and then it creates this sphere of energy that in turn creates the magnetic field. That entire trajectory is one of the faculties, and it's a temporary faculty that the biocybernetic complex of the human being harbors, that very few people know about, much less are dominating it or controlling it, which is what we need to get to. So this is key, that energy that comes from the center of the planet and goes outwards. It is golden energy.
Is that what's considered chi, prana?
No, that's more like orgone.
Thank you.
And so what you're seeing here is part of the gravitational field. This is at the level of the planet, obviously. But the gravitational field, you'll see it there in green. That has a cleansing mechanism that moves with each quarter of the moon. So when it cleanses the particles, the denser particles, the toxic particles from the planet's atmosphere. And it works with the 4 different cycles of the moon. It works similarly in the human being, our gravitational field, which I didn't have well, actually I do. It's the next one. It'll show you the 3 different rings, the electric field, which is seen there vertically, the magnetic field, which is the bigger ring that surrounds either the planet or human beings. When the electric field, which should be actually in the human, at this level of evolution, it should actually be the same size or very similar to the magnetic field. So once these 2 fields or spheres rub against each other, one spins to the right, one spins to the left, it creates a discharge of purple particles. That is what prana is. So the movement between the electric field and the magnetic field creates this discharge of particles. And we get the same effect when we breathe, right? When we move the electric field of our body and we start breathing, we're moving both those fields and we actually create prana. And that interacts with the same effects that happen at a planetary level. And here's a depiction of that as well. The magnetic field. The electric field, as they rub together and they create this purple violet energy. And then the gravitational field. And you'll see some of the golden particles created by that magnetic field. Those golden particles are very, very important. They go to another series of structures that are called the zones. And one of those zones are made up, instead of being a hologram of cubes, It is a series of spheres, which is the virtual aspect of our immune system. So you've heard that by certain yoga practices, you can activate your immune system. That's completely true. So this unified field happens at all levels. It doesn't happen at the parton and the quanta, but it happens at the level of the cell, of any cell, all the way up through galaxies and cosmos. So now we'll get into this. The alpha prima. Everybody should have heard of this if they've heard of me talking before, but the alpha prima is the central computer in the human being. So this computer exists. If you've heard me talk about the soul has a heptacubic form. In other words, it's one cube with 7 cubes adhered to each one of its surfaces. And each one of the cubes of those 7 cubes sort of appears like a third dimensional cross. But the center cube is purple. I won't go into the other colors and what they're for. That's sort of an advanced concept. But the center cube is where the actual work happens of the evolution of the individual. If you could go into it and project it into it with a Merkaba, an operator, or a fractal structure of your consciousness, which anybody can do, you'll find a very interesting room. And that room harbors the alpha prima. It's a central computer where you can find the master program, backup programs, the conductual pattern, the soul itself, and view it as a maintenance program.
Is that related to the, pardon me, is that related to the heptacube?
It's inside the heptacubic form. So inside of that center cube, in meditation or contemplation or reflection, you should be able to go into that space. That's what's actually found there. Besides the, if anybody's familiar with the Saint Germain images or videos of some of the older videos that were around in the 30s, 40s, 50s, you'll see a violet flame in the center as you walk in. That's where that happens. But at the center in general, you'll find a desk, a half of an octagonal desk, where there's a seat for you to sit in and a very large curved screen. On the desk, you'll find anywhere from 6 to 8 different implements. A star with tabs surrounding it, which is floating. On the right side, you'll find something that sort of looks like a tablet with different tabs around all sides of it, and other structures that look very much like the Platonic solids. And what those are specific programs that you can go into to modulate, for instance, the human body. So let's say you have some type of inflammation. You can call up the physical body, then call up the fifth plane of energy that's red, and you'll be able to observe which portions of the body have an excess of electrothermic charges. And that's just the observation. Once you do that, then you'll be able to call up blue energy, which is the complementary energy, and reuptake those red particles and stabilize them in that central computer just by utilizing the tools that are to your advantage. And we're going to be going over this both locally here, but I'm going to try and record it as well so people can have it. It's sort of a manual that the council wants to do, and this doesn't happen all the time. The sort of the politics around it. Most civilizations don't get to use the Alpha Prima until they're quasi-advanced or about to be advanced, or that they need an acceleration from, and this is a mandate that comes from the center of the galaxy, the different councils, and obviously the higher selves or the avatars that are hosts for our level of evolution. Most of the time, guardian angels, Elohim, our guides, they're able to go in there at will, obviously with permission, because this has to do a lot with the what do they call the prime directive, in that certain individuals are allowed for their substance to be modulated. Why? Because they already have some type of a convention or agreement with their higher selves, which you sort of go through as a rite of passage as you pass the different levels of discipleship and initiation on your personal quest. And that usually comes when you meet the master, or the master presents himself, or you have a religious experience, and you start sort of working with a being or an entity. It's usually your higher self that works through that. At that moment, there's a convention that happens where the individual can give permission, usually gives permission to the higher selves to modulate the body's electricities and other structures through the Alpha Prima. Now, what has happened now since since the mid-90s, we were given a series of tools that we can use. One of them was a series of healings that were done on Thursdays at 8 o'clock with the angels. And they sort of gave the introduction in the path of those healings in the usage of the Alpha Prima. 5 angels would come down at 8 o'clock specifically on Thursdays. We would have a set of protocols, and different types of healings would happen around the planet. It started from one center and spread out, and everybody got different levels of healings. But what was happening effectively is that the angels or technicians would come down, and they would bring their implements, their IVs, their computers, external computers, and would work on the subject in order to stabilize their structures. And obviously, we would see it as a healing. But they would also, when the specific higher self would be able to come in through a more global mandate, would come in and utilize the Alpha Prima to create for instance, a change of RNA or programming would have to happen. They would actually have to go into the Alpha Prima to make that change, as opposed to what we would view as just an external healing. So the change here is that we can go into the Alpha Prima with a little bit of direction. Obviously, we don't know exactly how that works, but you can go to it every night or every once in a while when you're meditating and start to experiment. I mean, you've got this enormous, for all intents and purposes, a quantum computer that's inside of your body that's attached to the different implements. And so that the idea in the near future is to start to work with the Alpha Prima, which I'm going to hopefully bring forth, and start to give this introduction on very simple things like inflammation, sight, working on seeing, on very simple things that we can see quickly, the effects of what the alpha prima does in the body. And then we'll get into more complicated concepts, such as working with the DNA directly, with the telomeres, with the programming of the telomeres, and then finally the operators. And so that the operators are actually those geometric forms that look like, there's 8 of them, which are very similar, not all, but very similar to the Platonic solids. And those are the ones that deliver the programming and software to the different organelles of the cells for us to function. And those are also the ones that become altered and create viruses, which we'll get into in the next meeting. Hopefully in the live meeting, we'll get into the operators and how they affect, how they work normally in an ideal situation, and how they are working, for instance, with the coronavirus. So the idea here with one of the faculties, the alpha prima, is that you will be able to draw down a frequency or have access to a frequency and implement that into the RNA or DNA structure for change. So that's kind of exciting, because we hadn't had that before. We had been always asking for permission, asking for help, things like that. We didn't have really a set of tools other than herbs and all the stuff that we know, and the external implements. But this is a very clean way of genetic implementation of a higher genetic code. So any questions up to that point?
No, just doing good.
Good. Yeah, I guess my voice hanging in there. I don't know how long.
Good.
All right. This is a 60s depiction of the cytobaric quantinomium with its they actually call them compressors, those structures that are spinning around. So you can see the electric field by red, the magnetic field shown in blue, and the gravitational field shown in green. And here, the nucleus is emitting Q rays. So the structure, the membrane around the center of all that is called the cytohelium. It's made up of 2 basic particles, actinium and animium. This is the first instance where 2 dimensions, or matter and antimatter, exist or emerge from. It happens at the nucleus. We won't get too much into that, but that's where quasars and quantars are created. So you've heard me talk about, especially you guys have seen me live. I always talk about IRDIM. That's IRDIM. Now we had a IRDIM.org, but had to bring that down for whatever reason. We started to bring out the IRDIM language into English because that's the first language that was brought forth when this information came out in about the 40s or 50s. So IRDIM is a galactic mother language of which our stellar variation or dialect is Sans Martinian. Sans Martinian is derived from Mars, and the first written language of San Martinian is Sanskrit. So Sanskrit comes from the mother language of IRDIM. And maybe I think when we get into string physics and ether, ergoplasma, some of the language is the original IRDIM language that's used. But anyway, IRDIM is a language where this is based on, and it's the galactic mother language. So we're going to talk a little bit about when the initial alteration of consciousness happens. And this is where we get a little bit into what I've never talked about on a general scale is X nuclei, neurosis nuclei, and the different effects that those particles have. So up to right now, we've talked about an ideal world. Now, because we are living in a non-sterile galaxy, that means there are bacteria of different orders, and that allows for the different emerging of different life forms. Well, anything from angelic life forms and avatars all the way to the Dracos and reptilian and even worse down below, which are very unstable life forms. Those create a specific type of consciousness that have been hardwired into the master program of this version of the human being, 7.0, 10.0. But the basic biocybernetic complex comes with sort of a default program, a Windows 5, what is it, Windows 5? 95, that's what it is. That was the basic Windows program that was given. Throughout time, it's gotten better and better. However, with the basic hardware that was the human being, it was hardwired with sort of a genetic code and a programming code that affects RNA, which is called, they call it the mind virus. And it's very important because it's the only thing holding back human beings and planets from moving forward. So in medicine, at least in quantic medicine and in exoplanetary medicine, we've always talked about at a medical level or the virtual aspect of the medical level, these different alterations, which in turn give us our different types of medicines that we use. They're usually in the form of electric cell salts and crystals and a whole array of things that we use that are based on what we understand as these alterations. Well, these alterations happen at a stellar level. In other words, our star has a whole series of transactions and interactions that create sort of havoc for all intents and purposes. Like the destroying of Maldek, which created the asteroid belt. That was one effect of the mind virus. And the effect of a pandemic mind virus situation that created this idea in the disbursement of chaos that eventually was the destruction of Maldek. And so the asteroid belt is one of the remnants of that saga that happened at that time. There's all different types of sagas. You've heard of the Anunnaki and that whole different thing. That's one of many. So there are many Star Wars stories, many Star Trek stories happening today. But what the council is mostly, and that would be called the normal sequence of living or evolving. It just happens throughout time. And so it's viewed as sort of normal in evolution. It's when it takes a long period of time, several sequences of 26,000 years, and no forward evolution happens. That's when something or someone or some groups of entities come forward and have to bring in a new mandate to push things forward. And that is part of the HyperJump. So the idea of these particles, of causal quanta that are created from electrical coherences between emotion and the mind, X nuclei that are created from general surrounding toxins and autotoxins that are created from the physical disturbances in the body are very important. All of these are derivatives of the mind virus, because the mind virus is sort of latent in the base operating system of the human. I think there's a little video coming, and you guys probably all seen this video, but I'll go through it real quickly. And the idea is to give you a sort of an overview of how that mind virus works today, because it does have to do with Morgellons. If you haven't investigated Morgellons, you'll see why possibly your loved ones, people surrounding society, is sort of infected. And the detection of the mind virus is the first step. So that's what this little video is about, is the detection, how to spot it, how to identify it, and then sort of understand where it comes from, and then the eventual reversal of the mind virus back to where it should be. The mind virus is really an aberration or an alteration of something that's normal. That's why it's hardwired in there, because it's a normal acting operator that's gone haywire. I'll stop right there. So there's another small clip there, but it has to do with those operators, and those are very much key. They've really perplexed me for many years in learning this type of extraterrestrial medicine. I mean, we knew it was extraterrestrial. We know it wasn't like anything we can go out and study anywhere. And so in the different meetings that we've had with the other physicians and professors and guides throughout time, nobody could give me a good answer on what those operators were. The best answer was that they have something to do with gamma, phi, pi, all those, that type of stuff that have more to do with Greek operators. But they didn't give me a hardwired, concise explanation into what these operators do until just recently. And so that's what I knew it was important, because the coronavirus, as well as every other virus that's out there, especially the retroviruses, are really just these normal operating structures in an altered form. And you'll see those. Every time you see a virus, you'll see a geometric structure behind it with maybe legs and hair and some ridiculous things, detectors and receptors and around it that emerge from the lack of the programming that that operator has. So that the answer is the reversal back into its genetic original form, not really its eradication. So something, I'll give you a little bit of a heads up, I can give you everything, but something happened off planet into where a series of beings and groups that are at war with each other are trying to eliminate specific groups. And I'll get into the groups later, but specific groups targeted. So it's a modified operator, not just a coronavirus. It's a modified operator that's conditioned to be able to be resistant to all types of reversal. And it has to do with a person's immune system. And so this is really going to help as much as the alpha prima in reprogramming and the reversal of that coronavirus in the same regard or in a similar regard as the mind virus, because they're both operators. They're operators of function, and there's a basic software that is had to do here. And you'll find that it's only being affected by certain groups. Sounds horrible, but certain racial groups, and they're targeted by off-planet sources. And so I'll try and get in there as much as I can on the next presentation. But this is just a small one on what the operators are in the scheme of the mind virus. Anyway, you get the idea. And you can find these little videos on Vimeo. The Mighty Magi is that's the channel where you can find them, which brings us into something else. And it's not really something else because it has to do with the same thing. The mind virus is created, and if you can think back in time, the scarcity model of the mind virus is a direct effect of this idea that we need gold, or somebody needs gold somewhere, and that some extrinsic source is the only reason to live, and it's the only reason for value on this planet and many other planets too. It's not just this one. So I've been working with certain groups besides the council, because the council is involved with something that they want to bring forward, or at least bring the message and the dynamics of where we're going in the future as far as space goes, and the activities that will very soon, between 25, 50, and even 100 years forward, we're going to have more interactions with space and with these beings. And it's going to have to do directly with space commerce and trade. That's already happening. It's just on the other side of the veil, in the curtain. Most of the gold that's been harbored and it's been hoarded is no longer on planet Earth. It's been taken off of planet Earth and is now in one of the moons off of Saturn, not far from where the Akashic records reside. So that the effect of the problem of the mind virus and scarcity has to do with the perpetual creation of fictitious value and worth. And that the newer systems coming up are going to be based on human energy, human electrics, because we do know even the ecclesiastical system, which is just a trustee, it's an intermediary for the coneheads and other groups through the years that are utilizing the Vatican and their dark energies to create this inflection of hoarding gold and that's the only intrinsic value that's out there. We have gold within our system. We have silver within our system. We have everything inside of each human body to be able to create the concept. And we can't jump forward into space commerce and trade until the emergence of human beings being an intrinsic source of energy. We are, and the Anunnaki know this, and the other groups know this, but with only the labor and the bloodline, and the pouring or sacrificial portion of human beings are the only thing that's being valued as far as commerce and trade go. The idea is that these 7 different electrics that we went through, that those be created and metered, cataloged, deposited, and utilized in the same way that Atlantis used when they created their first financial systems, because they had a great central computer that was a repository of these 7 different electrics. The mind virus already obviously got a hold of their society and created havoc, but the basic communal system of broad energy based on human beings created a very advanced system, which was on its way to implementing itself into a type 1 and 2 society, and having it did have more interstellar traffic and interstellar trade at that time. So that this new galactic financial system is emerging and is based on our value and worth. What does that mean? It means that we need to become conscious of these electrics and these implements within us in order to bring these things forward and implement because the system, the military knows everything that's going on, the big governments that are in contact with these beings, they know what's going on, and they know that we need to be moved forward. We can't be based on a debt system, on a fictional system, because that only works within one sphere of reality. And so that's what the galactic financial system is really about. Federal Reserve has been given notice, the Treasury been given notice of the charters that the council has brought forward. So that's something important for their system, notification. The rest is for us, and Starseed Technologies research is what exactly they're doing. It's a hands-on, nuts and bolts research facility in the research and development for both handling the mind virus on a very real level, in other words, a medical scientific level, and the development of a new galactic financial system, which can only be developed off planet. So here's a little video. Anywho, I think that's the presentation. So before I finalize, hopefully it went smoother than expected, but any questions up to there on some of those concepts?
No, just a lot to think about and process.
Well, we're going to keep moving forward on some of these sort of things that we've skimmed over and go into more detail. And like I say, I think next talk we're going to be, where I'm going to be bringing forward some more intricate information on the coronavirus and what it really is from an exoplanetary perspective, from a quantic perspective, and what can be done out here. But also to bring from the council's point of view, where it comes from is a little bit of the history. So I think that's it, and I thank you all for being, especially you guys in the East Coast, for hanging out, and hope to see you real soon, and hope to hear your comments. This will be public, and that's what we were looking for, because all the stuff that we were doing is private, and this is really the meat and potatoes of what the mission it really is at hand. And hopefully we can get this forward a little faster than in private means. So I thank you all. This is Sam Warren, format, and wish you all well.
Thank you, and thank all the beings who
Thank
work
you so
through
much.
you.
Yeah, thank you, M1.
Thanks.